Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Module 6. This point takes us up to 3/4 of the way done for this class, and I expect that that feels pretty good to a lot of you. The lessons for this module are divided into two parts. They talk about how to develop a strong thesis, and they talk about how to use reverse outlining, and that's something I've already recommended using. I want to take a moment to suggest to you that these two seemingly different lessons are actually talking about the same thing. MindEdge has some really good advice on how to go about building a thesis. And this advice concludes with a template, basically a fill in the blank for how to put together a thesis. And I think that this will be very helpful for you, not just for this class, but moving forward. I've taught writing to students at all levels, undergraduate and graduate, and I think you'd probably be surprised about how often I have to sit down and talk with a relatively experienced and advanced student about the need to sharpen a thesis. What I usually mean when I say that to them is that I would like them to put together something that fits this template so that I can see a concrete thesis in action. So let's start by defining thesis. The thesis is a summary of the argument that you are making about your subject, and it's usually presented in a single sentence at the end of your essay's introduction. The Module 6 lesson asks you to think about the thesis as being made up of different parts. It says that the thesis will will reference the subject that you're talking about. So it'll identify exactly what it is that you're writing about. And basically all that means is, in this case, that it'll be either Braxma, Tan, or Sedaris. That you're going to say that Sedaris does this, all right? So that we're clear that who it is that we're talking about. In all likelihood, you will have already referenced that in the introduction, since the thesis comes at the end of the introduction, but don't worry about that. Just go ahead and allude to it directly in the thesis. Part of the reason for doing that is because you have to kind of, when you're writing an academic paper and the thesis, excuse me, and the thesis comes at the end of that introduction, a lot of people will just take the opportunity to skim, and they'll just jump right down to that thesis and see what it's about. And they won't bother with a lot of the other introduction. They'll just want to get into the heart of it, all right? So what you're doing by renaming in the thesis is just catering to that or safeguarding against people who are going to skim right to it, all right? So rename exactly what it is that you're talking about. So the author, the name of the paper, or the name of the article that you're talking about, go ahead and say them again in the thesis. That's fine. The thesis also states the main point that you are making about the subject that you're talking about. So here you're saying Sedaris does this, and you got to say what you're saying about what Sedaris says, or what Tan says, or what Braxma says. All right. So your main argument also needs to be clear in the thesis. And what you do then is you add on to that allusions to the support that help shore up your point that you're making about the subject. All right. So it's going to say what the subject is. It's going to say what your main point about that subject is, what your argument is, and then it's going to kind of encapsulate the different areas of support that you think help make your point about the article. All right. Now, those are the three things that MindEdge says. And I would just go ahead and I would add one more element to that. And it would be that it's also a positive thing in the thesis if you can suggest in a quick way about why this matters. All right. So it's good to go ahead and toss that in. However, if you can get the first three parts down that are in this template, you're well on your way. Using the formula provided on MindEdge will set you up solidly for continuing the paper. All right. So don't worry so much about the why it matters, but looking forward in the future when you're writing more complex papers, think about that as well. All right. Now, the second part of the lesson for this week asks that you develop a reverse outline for your analysis essay. Now, partly this is to make you think about structure in the essay and see how everything hangs together. However, it is also an essential method to make sure that your thesis lines up with the paragraphs with what the paragraphs in your essay are actually saying. The thesis, after all, is not separate from your essay. Instead, it's supposed to be really the beating heart of the writing. So every paragraph needs to reflect the message encapsulated in your thesis in some way. If the paragraphs don't do that, then something is wrong. A few minutes ago, I said that the thesis summarizes your essay. So if you find a disparity between the thesis and the paragraphs, then either the thesis needs adjusting or the way the paragraphs deal with what the thesis is saying need adjusting. It's as simple as that. That's how the two parts of this week's lesson hang together. So let me also mention, the MindEdge lesson hints that it is wrong to begin writing with a thesis in mind. And this is not entirely true. It's actually a great idea to have some conception of where you're going when you begin writing. The trick is to remember that when you start with a thesis, it doesn't get engraved in stone at that moment. All right, so you can't make everything dance to that original thesis if the evidence that you develop just doesn't support it, or if you decide that the evidence supports a different interpretation of that thesis. Like all the rest of your work when you write, the thesis can, will, and probably should evolve as you continue to revise. All right, so just keep that in mind. This week I'll be doing some extensive feedback on your drafts for your analysis essay. I'll get those back to you just as quickly as I can. If you have questions as we move along, then as usual, you feel free and let me know. All right. And I'll see you next week.